Okay, good morning. This is week 9. Today we will talk about architecture of web application. Although we did talk about architecture in initial lectures, but today we will specifically talk on MVC, and then we will talk about sessions in detail in this lecture and web flow in application. Before going to today's agenda, which I have slide in PPT, I just want to show you that there are a couple of resources I have uploaded on in this week resources. Web application to insert record from data grid, and 2 ways to implement login. So there are 2 login forms which I will show you, by the way, at the end of this lecture if I would have enough time, and I'm sure I would get 15 to 20 minutes. I will show you these 2. Besides, you will see there are a lot of resources available on this web page, and you have to basically select which one is pertinent to your, especially the way you're doing your assessment. For example, if you're using MVC, then these might not directly relate to you. You would be mostly looking at sources online. But if you're dealing with the grade, then you will find some resources that are very useful on this page. Okay. And if you're not able to run these resources, for example, some of them may be websites, they will not have a solution file in there. In that case, you can go to file option, and there is a sub menu, open website. Okay, in Visual 2015 there was an option to create websites. In 2017 there is no option to create websites, but you can open websites. So difference between website and project is slightly different in structure. And in project you will always have a solution file, whereas in websites you don't have a solution file. You just close the directory and Visual Studio open the website. So hopefully I will be able to show you some code and how they have been implemented at the end of this lecture. So we can start with the lecture. Okay, so today we will discuss about architecture, multi-page web flows, and session usage. So some of you are using model view controller, so we just look at what it does, what is the overall architecture when we use architecture of your application, when we use MVC pattern. And in web application, we basically know that any business logic we want to implement, for example, shopping cart, CV builder, they consist of multiple web pages, like a wizard. So how we can build such application using ASP.NET. And if I just may add over here that currently when you add a web form, that web form submit all values to itself, and the logic is that whatever you need to add this logic over here, that is related to adding some information, editing some information, deleting some information, all that can be done in one web form. This is VB6 concept. If you have to build any business logic for entity in one form, you can do everything. So in that case, we think of one web form doing each and every aspect. But in this case, we will see how we can create a multi-page web flow of certain business logic. And we'll take into consideration insurance claim application example, and we'll see how these 2 are being used to create those web applications. And then we look at session management, and we will differentiate between application sessions, user sessions, by discussing each of them in fair bit of detail, and then we will discuss advanced use of session variables. Okay, let's start with MVC. So what is MVC? Some of you are implementing. Can you define it? No.
I never bothered.
Anyone? You're using it, yeah. Go ahead.
I couldn't define it.
Oh, what you want to say about it?
Oh, I've just been
Recording.
My filter just filtered.
So what is the architecture? You know, when we say architecture diagram in software engineering, what do you mean by that? Architecture diagram in software engineering. You know, deployment architecture. Deployment architecture of an application.
It's the components of
Components. The components and their placement. So that is called architecture deployment diagram. We have some components on this machine, some components on that machine. So and we draw a block diagram each, and within that block diagram we have some nodes. Each node basically represents a separate system, and within that we show those components, and we call that diagram a deployment diagram. So architecture is about components and their placement. Okay. So this model view controller basically is a sort of architectural pattern. Have you heard of design pattern? The word design pattern before? What is that?
It's like a set way of solving problems. Like, that's very broad, so you can apply to different situations.
So a solution, a reliable solution that you can apply to a problem that is occurring again and again. Okay, there are many problems that occur in your life, and after repeatedly addressing that problem, you come to an ideal solution that this is the if you face this problem, then this is a well-defined solution. And that's why we have design patterns in software development that you can use to solve the problem. Okay. So MVC, and this is pictorial presentation of MVC, and MVC is basically an architectural pattern. So there is some difference between design pattern or architectural pattern, but we are not going into that today. Okay. So for us, it is, we can say, design pattern or architecture pattern that basically give us some idea that how components are placed. Okay. So if you look over here, M basically is model, V view, and C controller. So over here we have views. Views are the pieces of information that someone is interested in. Okay. The end user, when you create use cases, you basically create use cases from user perspective, that this is what user want to do. Similarly, in case of any web application, we know that there are certain views, certain pieces of information that someone would be interested in. Okay, and behind the scene we are storing that information in a certain database, and that database we call model over here, and that database is centralized. The views may show different information, but that information is coming from same model, and it is quite possible that the same information is viewed in 3 different ways. Okay, we have analog clocks, we have digital clocks. Time is same, data is same, but the view is different. Why we have different views? Because end user want it in this way. Okay, so sometimes analog clock gives you a sense, okay, how much time is left behind. Digital clock will not give you that sense immediately by looking at it.
It's like we have like a spreadsheet of data, maybe sometimes you want the spreadsheet, sometimes you want the graph.
Yeah. So for someone, for example, if you have data in a spreadsheet and it is some accountant who needs to drill down certain facts, spreadsheet is useful for him. But if there's higher management people who are just looking at the trends, for them spreadsheet means nothing. They need a graph. So it's the same information but different views. So we have same information represented as model over here, and then we have different views of that information. Then how we can bind these together? Okay, controllers comes into play. Controllers receive information from the view, what user is asking for, and give it to the model. Model returns it to the controller, and controller give it to the view. If user asks to change the view, model gets that information, and then accordingly it can change the view and display another view to the user. And in order to display this view, again information will be pulled out and shown to the user. So this is a model view controller design pattern, or it is also called as an architectural pattern, because it tells you that there is separations of concern. It decouples data and presentation. Now people can work on views separately. They know what would be the data coming in and going out, and the people who are building business logic, they know which view they need to call and how they can query data model and so on. So this is model view controller. It is the development process. It is the testing process. It is the integration process. Okay. And there's one other advantage. In normal ASP.NET, when we develop web pages, especially when workshop week 4 and week 5, we develop some product pages, and you saw that at the, if we click edit, delete, or go to some other page, I want to look at the details of the product, we need to forward an ID against which we want to see the details. Okay. In case of MVC, the URL would be different. Each URL will basically holds the information about which view user is interested in. For example, over here we have beverages. Beverage is a view which is being created in the web application, and it will display to user. Whereas over here we are passing ID of a category type which is beverages, and that would be given to the web application, and web application retrieves the information. Okay, so you can see a big difference in the URL. So what advantage do you think we can achieve having such URLs? Functionality does not differ. User want to see the details of this their beverages. This page is giving you details. This page is also giving you details.
Yeah, it's easy to understand.
It's easy to understand. Yes. What else?
If there's any problem with beverage page, we can just like go to beverage.
Yeah, easily. Yeah. So you can easily go to the views, and it's again easy management of your websites. Search engines basically look at the URLs. Now this page is a dynamic page. It generates. Search engine will not go and execute this query to generate the list and then index the beverages out on this page. No, they look at the meta tag and the URLs. So if your URL is like this one, then better indexing can be done, and the search engine can return better results to the user. Okay, so searching, especially for search engines, their searches get optimized. They can give better results to the user. So in enterprise environment, you search for something, you are expecting to get better results. So model is the underlying database. Okay, it could be database, or it may be the classes, especially if you are using entity framework, is a set of classes, getters and setters, that pull the information from the database and give it to the database. So your controller, which is basically binding these together, the views and the model, that controller can basically interact with the model. It can tell the model of the object, for example, get employees information. It could be a model which is generated on the basis of information provided in the database, okay, or it could be the database itself to retrieve the information and present it to the user. Okay, so the controllers are the binding one, and the model could be the database itself or a wrapper around the database, and that wrapper is again set of classes, and we create objects of those classes to retrieve information or add information to the database. And we all know that in web application, different clients with different browsers from different location would be accessing one website. Okay, so it is a complex scenario. Okay, so multiple requests will be going through controllers to the models, and they will get served. So in web application, we may have many controllers. So views are basically attached to the controllers, and that controller basically link them to the model. Now MVC is well-defined pattern which is independent of any language. You find MVC implementation in ASP.NET, and some of you are using MVC pattern. Some you also find in Java, for example, Struts framework is the one. If you look at ASP.NET web forms which we are using, they are also following the philosophy of MVC. They're not pure MVC, but they are following the philosophy of MVC. How do they follow it? The forms, we can consider the forms as views. Okay, they are the one on which we drop the controls and configure them to display the information. The code behind the CSS file that is attached with each ASPX file. So, and if we have button over here, if we double click the button, it creates an event handler for that button. Okay, what we want to do when the button is clicked. So we consider that code behind the events as controller, and those controllers basically interact with the database. Okay. So ASP.NET web form basically follows the same philosophy, but if you use pure MVC pattern in .NET, then you will have model which is more complex. That model, the database itself contain wrappers of objects that represent the database. Okay. Now let's come to building an application which consists of multiple steps. As I mentioned in the start of the lecture, that in ASP.NET web form, the philosophy is a web form is designed, the architecture of web form is such that it provides you an easy way to develop each and everything that you want to process about an entity. Add, edit, delete functionalities can be done within a web form. You don't need to go to another page. Okay. But in some application we might need to create web pages, such as we have insurance claim form over here, that on one page user basically enters some basic information, and then we submit information and we go to another page on which we ask for claim details. Okay, so this is a multi-page web application. So there is web flow involved. This, you can say, transactional nature of business logic. So how we can do this? Okay, and what we need to do over here is that whatever users have entered over here, we want to display it on the next web page. In traditional web applications, especially in your first assessment, you did this. You submitted information from the form and you received it on the next web page. Okay. Now we want to achieve that within the ASP.NET web forms. Okay. So that whatever user has entered over here, it should be displayed on the next web page, and then user can basically add his claim information. And the challenge over here is that at the moment each form posts it to itself. Okay. So what we can do? So as soon as this button is clicked, we need to tell the application to go to some other page. Don't post back to itself. Okay. So how we can do that? We have this server.transfer method, and this method basically is written in code behind. So behind that button, click even, we can code this method, server.transfer, and to which web page we want to transfer it. Okay. So as soon as button is clicked, for example, if we have claim form1.aspx, and on that page we have that button, and if we click that button, behind that button we have this code, that control will be transferred to claim form2.aspx. And if we want to, we have another form, we can do the same thing for the second form. Against the button we write server.transfer claim 3 form. In this way we can shift the control from one page to another page and so on. Okay. And it's not the control only we want to transfer. We also want to transfer the values. In traditional web application, it was a request object which basically goes to another project, another web page. So what we want to do? We want to transfer the values, whatever the values that user have entered the control, we want to transfer them as well. So what we need to do is, when we write this statement, the second attribute is true or false, which tells that whether you want to transfer the values that user entered or not. If you set it true, then all the values which user have entered, they will transfer, they will be accessible to the second page as well.
That's brilliant.
Yeah. But the issue is how you can access them on the web page. Okay. In normal code behind, if you go in code behind, you can access the controls. Textbox1.text. Did you try that? If you not, you will do. I think in today's web application, if you have implemented login, if you had look at the login example I have provided, and if you go in code behind, you can see that you can access the controls by name textbox1.text to retrieve their values. But once, if you have applied this method, then on the next page you cannot access the controls itself. You will not be able to do textbox1 of this web page dot text. It will not work. So how you can basically retrieve the value? So in this case, request object would be transferred the way it has been done in traditional way. Okay, in the way you did in your first assessment. Key value pair. So request object would be transferred as key value pair, and I think I have example on the next couple of slides. I will show that example. So in this case, there is one difference. You will not be able to access the controls on the second page. Whereas as long as you are in this page, in code behind, you can access all the controls by name, and you can change their attributes, their properties, you can retrieve value, you can assign value. But when you shift the controls over here, you cannot access the controls that were on this page directly. But the values have been submitted, and the request object contains keys and values. For example, textbox1, that was the idea of that page, is accessible over here with the value. And I will show you an example in a minute. So server.transfer is a way you can move from one page to another page. But there are certain limitations with server.transfer. In server.transfer, the server has to be residing on the same, the new web page has to be residing on the same web server. same application server. Okay, so it should be on the same machine to make it simple. So both the forms should be in the same machine, then server.transfer works. Okay, if it is on some other machine, then this method will not work. So you have to be very careful about architecture of your application. Okay, and one advantage of server.transfer is that when you move from claim form 1 to claim form 2, to user this is not visible. To user it will be claim form 1 only, and you can go from and actually you may be on claim form 2 or maybe on claim form 3, but the user URL will not change. So implicitly internally application server is transferring to another page, and in URL the new request is not being generated. Okay, so this is server.transfer. So if this is the case, if pages are residing on some other server, what you can do, then we have another method which is called redirection, and that is response.redirect to another page. Okay, in this case a new request would be generated to the web server, and the web server will locate the page and then return it to you. But in this case, will the values will be transferred by default? No. Okay, so you have to do some methodology how to transfer this value, and these things are specific with ASP.NET we are talking about. So event handlers are critical in this case when we use server.transfer especially, and this is the same example in which we want to move from claim form 1 to claim form 2, and if this is the claim form 2, we would have certain labels on this claim form to display this information, and this is how we basically code behind the button the server.transfer and move that, for example, claim form 2 to claim form 3. In C#, the text would be a little bit different. Okay, and one other thing, in C#, event handlers are automatically provided. If you go page load event would be there. And VB.NET it's not the case. You have to basically go and click these pop-up drop down menus to and select the method you want to generate, and if you select the load value from that drop down, it will generate the method for the signatures for that method. Okay, so what do we need to do on this web form, which is second form? We need to write request that item policy number if you're using a VB. So this is the same way which we do your assessment 1. Over here you cannot access the controls, so you need to access the request object and the policy number. For example, that was the ID of that text box. Okay, so key value pair you need to use, and if you're using C#, then these are square brackets. So in this way we using the server.transfer, and then on the next page receiving the values by using accessing the request object, we can display the values of those controls. So in this way we can create a multi-page logic in ASP.NET. Okay, but we have to understand the architecture of application where pages are residing. So if they are residing on the same machine, then server.transfer. If they are not, then you need to use other methodology, which is response.redirect is one way. So views are used to show the claim form information. We are moving from one view to another view. First view we ask for information, second view we display some information and ask for further information. Now in controller layer, what we do, we basically process that information. For example, server.transfer was in control layer. Okay. In addition to that, we basically do data validation, data conversion, business logic would be in controller. We call certain methods to process the information, and we know that when you are working with C#, data conversion is very critical. VB is a little bit relaxed in terms of giving you flexibility that you don't need to do this data conversion explicitly. Okay, implicitly it converts, and while runtime, if conversion is not successful, it will give you an error. If you haven't written exception handling for that error, expected error, your application will crash. Whereas in C#, it wants you to explicitly do all this conversion, and this reduces the chances of application crash. Okay, so there are pros and cons using VB and C#. So this is the overall flow of that claim insurance claim web application. We started with claim form first, user did some interaction, and in controller layer we wrote server transfer, and we went to claim form 2. To user it was still the URL was same, there was no change in URL, and then eventually we finished our logic, which was basically displaying this claim form 3, finalization of entire process and so on. Okay. And this type of webflow requires some session management, and we will see how we can do that. But if session management is not there, then you have to basically make true variable, a second attribute as a true, and then you can manage it. But once you have received some, unless you receive these values over here and transfer them again to next page, those values will not go directly to this page. Okay, so that's why we receive that value and put them in certain control, and when this form is transferred to this form, those values will be available as a request object. So it will not be like that, the request object which is transferred over here and you did not recapture that value, they will not automatically forward to this one. That request object will lost unless you capture those values, assign it to controls, and move on. So that was about multi-flow logical application. Sessions management. State management in web application. The state management, when we say state management, what do you think? What we are talking about? What do you mean by state in application, any application? Right now you're in specific state. You're a student, but you're teaching this course on this point of time, and this is your state. Your state will change after 10 minutes and so on. So similarly in web applications, there are certain states, and we need to manage those states. Okay, and we will see how sessions are important. So sessions are the one way to manage those states. Okay. Now state management, which is basically some particular values of variables at particular period of time when particular user is doing something. We call it as a state. Now state management in web application is quite different from desktop based development environment. What do you think? What is the difference? If
you're dealing with multiple simultaneous users.
You are dealing with multiple simultaneous, so it's a distributed nature. Some users are accessing the application from USA, some are accessing from China, some are accessing from Australia. So they, first of all, distributed in nature. Okay. Scale, again, that's other thing. In case of desktop application, it is residing on one machine. Okay. And if there are multiple users, they might access it, but it's residing on single machine. Whereas web application, it may be distributed on various machine. Okay. What else?
If someone, like, if you connect into a server, the states that your computer thinks it's in and the server could be different. Like, but you can time out of your login, but your side doesn't realize that until you use.
Yeah, so another issue is because the distributed nature of application, you have client server environment, maybe on server side something happened and user is considered logout, but on client side user didn't intention to logout or so on, or maybe it's other way around. User is basically on client side is trying to log in. This is what you're trying to say?
Yeah, like they could think they're in different states and then you wouldn't know until.
So this is distributed nature. There are different states, how to reconcile. So business logic is distributed. In most of these desktop applications, the business logic is centralized. Database is there. For example, variables are there. In case of these web applications, variables may be distributed. On client side, we will see what are cookies. You might have cookies. On server side, cookies are not accessible. So there would be different states that may conflict with each other. So in case of web desktop application, it's on a single machine and one user, mostly one instance of that application, where in case of web application, we will see it's totally different. In case of desktop, local memory is used. All variables are residing in local memory and your application can easily access them, buy them and so on. Whereas in case of web application, client is interacting with the server. Where variables are, there is no shared memory in client server architecture. Okay. So how you manage then variables values? Okay. So in case of web application, we have client server environment. Okay, client requests something and server respond to you. So on both sides we are dealing with variables. Okay, and there may be some shared variables among the users. Okay, have you heard of singleton pattern? Okay, no, leave it, that's fine. So there is an interaction between user and the client and the server, and on every interaction things are reloaded, and according to user things are customized, pages are regenerated. Okay, so there's the dynamic nature of a client server architecture over there. And because the communication is asynchronous, do you know the HTTP protocol is asynchronous protocol? You know synchronous communication and asynchronous communication? So asynchronous communication is one way. You submit the information, that's it. Where synchronous information, you do a handshake, and after that handshake, you know whom you are talking to. In asynchronous, you can think of broadcast and so on. So in case of web application on screen, things would change depending upon how users interacting with the web application. And as we know, thousands of people may be online, they are interacting with the server, and server has to maintain state of each and every user. How it will do it, that's the challenge for the server. Okay, and it's possible that user move from one server to another server. Then how the state of user on one server needs to be transferred to another server, so that user don't need to log in again on the other server. And I'm sure you must have heard of single sign-on. And that single sign-on has been implemented on ECU information systems, that you log in into one application. Once you are successful in login, and you go to another web application, it may not ask you for login details again, because your identity has been transferred to another server, and that server basically continues serving your request. So this is the challenge which we face in web application. Now there are two types of sessions: application sessions and user sessions. And first of all, what is a session? Session is basically a hash, a numeric key, which is used to identify a client on the server side. If I recall correctly, I mentioned to you that when a visitor comes to a university, he will be issued a visitor card, and that would be his identification. So you can consider that card as a session key, as a session of that person. So this is alphanumeric key, which is used by a client, which is used to maintain the state of the client on server side. Okay. And in case of application, as I mentioned, there are two types of sessions. One is application sessions, and second is user sessions. We will look at user sessions on next slide. In case of application sessions, each application maintains its state. Okay, and if you know that we in a browser we can read an email, we can open a YouTube video, and we generate multiple requests from those pages, and response comes to that page only, whatever from which we have generated a request. Okay, so although the HTTP stream behind the scene is only 1 pi, so how does that happen? Basically, the browser attaches some whenever request is sent to the server, there is some information attached with each request, that which machine generated this request and which application generated this request. Okay, that information is sent to the server, and server basically generates a session key and give it back to the client, so that client can reuse this session key again and again, so that client can be authenticated again and again. So if, for example, in this case we have three browsers. Each browser is basically his request is being identified using a separate application session ID. Okay, and on client side, when information come, the HTTP data stream come, it basically look at, okay, this is the response, and this response is for which browser. Okay, in this case, which tab, if you're using multi-tab browser. So in short, we know that each application basically, when we run, creates a session with the server, and a key behind the scene is generated, and that key is used to identify, okay, the response should go to which tab of the browser. But sessions in user sessions are quite different. They are not related to application. Okay, they are the session which are used to maintain state of the user within the web application. Okay, so HTTP status protocol, as I mentioned before, so every time we basically send some information and we receive the response, server does not know what was sent before. or state would not be retained. Every time you send that request, it is a brand new request for the server. Okay, it's like every time when I come to class, you don't know who is that person, and we start from scratch again. Okay, so this is a stateless protocol. And in order to overcome this issue, because in web application we need state, and examples of shopping cart, user add product in shopping cart and continue shopping, so state needs to be maintained, shopping cart needs to be maintained. Okay, so we need some mechanism so that every time we send request to the server knows that this is the guy who already put 2 stuff in the shopping cart and he is adding another stuff. So state is being maintained on the server side. So this is a conversation. So we have to maintain the previous state that we have already discussed, and we can build on that conversation. So same concept is applied over here. And shopping cart is one example. So sessions are important for user management. Sessions can be used in multiple ways to maintain the state of the user. For example, the claim form example we discussed. In that we discussed that we can use server.transfer with a second attribute as true. But in that case we have to receive the values on second form, assign to the controls, and then submit the form, retrieve the value, and process those values. So we have to do some extra coding. We can use session to store the form values. For example, before server transfer, we can create session variables, and we can assign all the values that user entered into the form. We can assign them. We can create session variables. Session variables will save on server side. So whenever we load this ASPX form, we can look at the server that this is the user. Against this user, what data we have, and when we develop application, we know the session names and values. We can retrieve the form value and can display it. No matter how many forms we have, as long as we have variables stored as session, we can access on any page. So this is the way we can use sessions for user state management. So as I mentioned, it's basically a hash table, key value pair. Like request object, we have key value pair. Similarly, in hash, we have key value pair. Against each key which is generated, which could be user ID or username, against that key we have alphanumeric key, which is used behind the scene. So this is very similar to request object. And in some cases, if we create for example, the user ID as a session key. For example, in many information system, in ECU information system, your user ID is being used to store information against courses, against enrollments, against your degree, and so on. If we use your user ID as a session ID, then on all the pages that in which we have to retrieve your information, we can store your student ID, and then we can access that student ID on each and every page where we may require it in SQL query. For example, this is a page where we say that okay, retrieve all the information of student where student ID is from session variable. Retrieve all the courses or maybe all the enrollments of this student where student ID is this. So we can retrieve the ID from session, and it basically ease the development process. Okay. So we can use session IDs that can help us to retrieve the records from the database. Okay. In shopping carts, especially if you're not logging into the website, you can still do shopping, isn't it? You go on eBay and you start adding products into shopping cart. You have not logged in, but your shopping cart is maintained. What happened? The ID that is being generated against your shopping cart is put in a session ID, and that is uniquely for you. And once they ask you, when you go for checkout, they ask you to register. And once you register, your credentials would be the ID which is stored as session ID, which is shopping cart ID, will be assigned to you, and checkout will process. Okay. So this is again using session. You can maintain the user state even though user is not logged into the system. So how we can set values to the session? Basically, this is in VB. Session is object and item is the method. Okay, and this is the name of that session variable. Key, and this would be the value, key value pair. And policy number is the control, and dot text is a attribute through which we can access the values. In C#, you basically use you can access the session variable. You can create session variable this way, we are creating a policy number session and we are assigning a value. Okay. And how we can retrieve the values from session so that we can process the information. This is in VB session.item and it will be assigned to the text. So other way around, in case of C#, sessions are basically stored as a string. So you have to cast them. They are stored, I think, as a byte. So that's why you need casting into a string so that you can assign them to object. Okay. You can check this one. Okay. Especially if they're numbers, then definitely you need casting. Sorry, this is object. That's why we are converting to a string. Okay. Anyhow, so we create sessions, we use sessions. When user basically finishes activity, we need to destroy the session as well. Application sessions get destroyed when you close the browser. Okay. How you can destroy the user session? Sessions are abandoned. It basically destroys all the session variables that were created for to manage the state of this user. Okay. So session.destroy is used, I think, in PHP. This. So if you use this method and user try to access a new page, and in new page we have something written like this. If it is a new session, then redirect the user to claim form 1. Okay, and this is in I think VB and this is in C#. Okay, same philosophy we will use in login page. If user is not logged in, if user is logged in, then we should not redirect him to a login page. Rather, we redirect him to some other page, which is maybe members area page. I will show you code in a minute. These are other methods in which we don't want to destroy the session, but we just want to remove some values. We want to remove some session variables. For example, shopping cart example I gave to you. Once user logged in, now user ID has been assigned to the shopping cart, and we can remove the shopping cart session variable. So we can select some variables and we can remove them as well. Or we can use session.remove all or session.clear. So the different ways we can use, and each method has some uniqueness from other. Most of these methods empty the session. They don't destroy the session variables. Okay, they just empty them. We can take 10 minutes break and then we will start from here. And only 15 slides are left, so I would have enough time to demonstrate you the two examples which which are uploaded on the resource page. So any question up till now? What should we have covered? No? Okay, so we can take 10-minute break. Sorry, I took a bit extra time. What is this?